Hey, y'all, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is my college football summer school series on Cover 3. I bring on the team experts from the 24/7 sports staff and ask them the questions I care about. No fluff. Which players will be toughest to replace? What position groups are sneakily better or worse than I realize? We get you the scoop on each team in 20 minutes or less. Let's go. Hey, guys. Bud Elliott here. Welcome back to College Football Summer School on the Cover 3 Podcast Network. Today, we're going to talk a little Virginia Tech Hokies. And to help us do that, we're going to bring in Doug Bowman of VTScoop. Doug, welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So last year, first year under Coach Brent Pry, not the best year, 3-8, one of the absolute worst power-rated Power 5 teams out there. I will say 1-4 in one-score games, so maybe they were like a game unlucky, maybe a game and a half unlucky, but certainly the power ratings don't suggest that they were a whole lot better than 3-8. What's the general mood there in Blacksburg?
I think you're feeling better than they were last year. Certainly, the offense was historically bad. Lost a handful of close games, as you said, that could have gone the other way with just even a marginally better offense. So Tech went out and addressed that in the offseason. They added a new running back, 3 new receivers, brought in another quarterback to compete with Grant Wells. So from a skill position perspective, Virginia Tech's feeling better about their playmakers and their ability on offense. There's still question marks at quarterback, plenty of question marks on the offensive line. There's the whole G5 to P5, guys moving up a level and whether they can be as productive as they were. So plenty of questions, but they at least went out and addressed some pretty dire needs based on last season.
All right, so you brought it up, the offense, 125th in Bill Connolly's offensive power ratings, and specifically bad was the non-existent passing game, a success rate of 36% throwing the football, which is, I've been doing this for a long time. That's one of the worst I've ever seen. Did they make any changes with the offensive coaching staff this year, or if so, are they going to do anything differently?
Yes and yes. So last year, Tyler Bowman was the offensive coordinator and tight ends coach. Brad Glenn was the quarterbacks coach and passing game coordinator. He's since left to become the offensive coordinator at Cincinnati. Joe Rudolph was the offensive line coach and running game coordinator. He's since left to go to Notre Dame. So they brought in Ron Crook to coach the offensive line. They moved Stu Holt from running backs to tight ends coach, and they gave Bowen he's now full-time offensive coordinator. Not that he wasn't last year, but they had a couple running game, passing game coordinators in there, and they made him the quarterbacks coach. They feel like that's going to give them a little more streamlined continuity there with the coordinator coaching the quarterbacks too. So we'll see how it works out. Bowen has never coached quarterbacks, so that's a question mark going into the season on whether prior experience coaching quarterbacks is that important for a guy who's spent at least a couple of years now as an offensive coordinator. So coaching staff has some questions, and then obviously we'll see how they change their offense. They've talked a little bit about wanting to run the quarterbacks more, and then they definitely need to generate more big plays than they could last year.
That's really interesting. And this is one of the parts that I love doing summer school, because you find out stuff. I'm glad you brought that up. When I saw their staff they hired last year, I thought they were going to be really heavy QB run anyway, especially because Grant Wells, when he was at Marshall, right? He ran the football effectively and was not a great passer at Marshall. They bring in Kyron Drones from Baylor, who's obviously really mobile. More quarterback running. They might be the most quarterback run heavy team in the Power 5 if they're going to do that. That's really interesting. So Wells is still competing for this job. I don't know how to ask this without sounding like a jerk, but does that say something about Drones that Wells still has a shot to win this job? Are there specific things they think he can actually get better at? The numbers last year were so bad. It's almost concerning to me as an observer that he's still in this thing.
I think that's a valid point and valid argument to make. Drones comes in. He's pretty green. He didn't play that much at Baylor, so I think there was I don't know if expectation is the right word, but this spring, it was tough for him to come in 15 practices and immediately overtake Grant Wells. So that's why the competition is stretching into August. Brent Pry even said this week that they'd probably play two quarterbacks if the season were to start today. So we'll see if Drones makes the strides that he needs to make as a passer. I think is the main thing. Wells certainly knows the offense, is comfortable in the offense, and that's really, I think, what it's going to come down to is does the coaching staff value the knowledge that and experience that Wells has within the offense versus kind of the untapped potential of Drones. Even if there would be some growing pains, he's probably got a little bit of development still to do as a passer compared to Wells.
And the schedule doesn't necessarily start super easy to break a guy in. For those at home who don't have it pulled up, Old Dominion, which somehow beat the Hokies last year, Purdue, Rutgers, which is on the road, at Marshall, Pitt, at Florida State, Wake, Cuse, at Louisville, at Boston College, NC State, at UVA. Like that's not a hard schedule if you are a top 10 type team, but if you're a team trying to make a bowl game, that is a difficult schedule. Like they could use an FCS team in there earlier. I feel like to break that up. Okay. They have to feel though like the receiver, even though they lost some productive pieces, to go out and get Allie Jennings from Old Dominion and to get Jalen Lane from Middle Tennessee State. Those are at least some explosive weapons for them. Like they feel pretty good about the position now, or at least decent.
Yeah, I think they feel completely different than what they were at last year. Caleb Smith was the one playmaker on the entire offense last year. He transferred to Notre Dame and then had to medically retire. But they immediately addressed it, as you talked about. Jennings from Old Dominion started his career at West Virginia, and then Jalen Lane from Middle Tennessee State. They also added Daquan Felton from Norfolk State, he's 6'5", pretty athletic looking. He's one of the guys that you wonder about production moving up to the P5 level. So they added 3 guys right at the top of the depth chart, which tells you how they felt about the rest of the depth chart that they had coming back. So I think they feel a lot better. They love the competition that they brought, and certainly a lot more production. I mean, all 3 of those guys, if you look at their just sheer reception numbers, it's above and beyond what Virginia Tech's had over the last couple of years.
So Justin Fuente is probably not on Brent Pry's Christmas card list, based on what he left him at receiver.
I would say not.
Gotcha. Offensive line last year, this team definitely battled some injuries based on the snap counts at different positions. O-line appears to have stayed pretty healthy, and now left tackle and the center are gone. Is this a unit that we think, can it be status quo? Can it take a step forward, or are you projecting a step back? Where do you kind of feel about these guys?
I went back and watched the summer school we did last year, and you asked me a similar question. I said it was the biggest question facing Virginia Tech, and it's still the biggest question facing Virginia Tech. I think they have a higher ceiling this year and a lower floor. They could be starting a redshirt freshman at both left tackle and left guard. Xavier Chaplin played 28 snaps last year. Braylon Moore was a guy that kept the 4-game redshirt rule on him, but are they ready to go as redshirt freshmen? We'll see. And then they have a big hole at right guard still that they're looking to address, the battle there. So the first 5 could be better if those freshmen come through, those young players come through. But it just like last year, if 1 or 2 injuries, it could get ugly quickly there on the offensive line.
For sure. All right, let's switch over to the defensive side of the ball here. Top 40 in most of your power ratings, which is, compared to the offense, much better. And that obviously speaks to Pry's coaching ability, I think, and the fact he was a really good DC at Penn State for quite some time. I guess it doesn't matter how, within reason, it doesn't matter how good you are defensively if the offense just repeatedly can't score. See also the Miami game, right? But
yep.
Signs of encouragement here. Is this a unit you think that can take another step forward?
Yeah, I'm pretty optimistic on the defense. I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. They were pretty good last year, given they were dealt tough hand after tough hand by the offense, especially in those one-score games we mentioned. I mean, held NC State to 21 points, Georgia Tech to 28. ODU only scored 13 offensive points. I mean, that's 3 games that could have gone the other way with just a little help from the defense. But yeah, I think it's a similar story defensively to last year. Tech has a lot of returning guys that they know what to expect out of. Pollard and Kendricks at defensive tackle are back for their 6th year. Alan Tisdale at linebacker is back for a 6th year. Nasir Peoples at safety is back, is another returning starter. So they got kind of that solid base. And then you look at guys like Mansour Delane, who was quietly one of the best cornerbacks in the country last year. Kelly Lawson is a linebacker. He's kind of like a Tremaine Edmonds clone type athleticism, 6'6", 240. Jay Billis would love his length and athleticism, I think. So there's potential. They brought in Antoine Powell Ryland from Florida last week through the transfer portal, trying to get a little more pass rusher. So I think they have the pieces to be as good as they were last year, maybe even better. You look at kind of the high end. They've added some high ceiling talent, Delane and Lawson, that I think raises their ability. And certainly in year 2 of the Brent Pry defense, he's giving up play calling duties this year. Actually gave it up at the last game of the year last year, just because he felt he wasn't as good as head coach as he could be while he was calling defensive plays. So that's something to watch as far as what impact that will be with Chris Marv calling plays over Brent Pry. But it's still Pry's defense. He's still going to be heavily involved there, and you have to feel like he's going to have his fingerprints all over the defense, and they should be pretty decent again there.
I was going to ask you about that pass rush. Like last year, they actually they rated fairly highly in pressure rate, but not very highly in converting that pressure rate into sacks, which sometimes is by design. Like Bama kind of looks like this a lot of times, right? They get the ball out quickly, but they don't usually finish. Like, was finishing a problem?
I just don't think they had the personnel to get to the quarterback in the first place. Their defensive ends we knew were decent defensive ends, but no big pass rusher at defensive end. And their linebackers were kind of the same story. So I think that was a big part of. They added Powell Island from Florida. They have a JUCO transfer coming in. We'll see if he can play early, and then a couple guys that they're hoping to develop. That's still the biggest question to me for Virginia Tech's defense, is if they can get enough pressure on the quarterback to really take a step up defensively, or if it's going to be more of the same.
I'm kind of curious about JUCO recruiting going forward, like with all these recruiting spots going to transfer portal kids and schools having fewer spots to give to high schoolers. There's some chance that we get some really good players emerge from JUCO in the next couple of years, just because the quality of player going to a JUCO now, I think, is higher than it used to be in some cases. So run defense, as opposed to pass defense last year, was a pretty clear weakness compared to a strength. How do you feel about the run defense? I mean, losing Dax Holyfield, like the guy makes a lot of plays when he's healthy, and last year he stayed pretty healthy. Are they going to be better there against the run?
Tough to say right now. They return their top 3 defensive tackles who have played a ton of snaps. Pollard, Kendricks, and Josh Fuga feel pretty decent about there. They currently don't know who the Mike linebacker though, and that's a pretty big piece of the defense. Had 3 or 4 guys rotating through during the spring, and nobody really seized it. Jaden Keller is a young linebacker that the Fuente staff raved about him. The Pry staff has raved about him. It's just a matter of if he can put it all together. They have Tisdale is another one. He's the veteran coming back who could be a factor. And they add Stone Snyder, who's a transfer from VMI, was a 3-time FCS All-American there. It's another guy bumping up a level and seeing if that'll carry over. So as far as personnel, the Mike linebacker spot is the biggest remaining question for Virginia Tech, in that they don't know who the starter is there and who it's going to be. So as far as the run defense, I think that's the big piece that they need to figure out before we can make any sort of projection about how good they'll be.
For sure. Derek Canteen comes over from Georgia Southern, was a really good player in the Sun Belt. Was he in for spring? And if so, does it look like he's acclimated pretty well?
Yeah, I think he's probably, Brent Pry would tell you, he's one of the biggest additions they've made. He's likely going to be the starter at the nickel spot, which Virginia Tech will tell you. Chamari Connor, who was a 4th-round pick for the Chiefs, played the nickel last year, but was not a good fit for that position. He was just the best option Tech had. So they feel like they really upgraded that spot, and they'll be able to, I think, play that nickel spot a little more confidently. He certainly hit the ground running. They love his leadership ability. They love his work ethic and all that he's about. They talk about his influence on Delane as a young sophomore corner and working with him. I think they feel really good about Canteen and the impact he'll make kind of on and off the field. And then with Delane, Canteen, and Dorian Strong is coming back from, I think he had a broken arm or a broken elbow, one of those last year. So they have 3 cornerbacks that they feel really strong about, and that could really be the strongest point of the defense.
All right. So what position do they need the injury luck at? What spot is the biggest drop off between starter and reserve?
Defensively or offensively? Or
we can go either side.
Yeah, I mean, I covered it. It's the offensive line.
Okay.
It's one. They don't even know if their starting 5 is going to be that great. But certainly it gets even more questionable as you get into the second unit with a lot of young players that, they're obviously not good enough to break into that top 5. And then if you're forced to play them, I think that's going to be that's the key question. They got pretty lucky last year with the injury bug on the offensive line, where Joe Rudolph did not rotate much at all, even knowing that they didn't have that great of an offensive line last year. So they're kind of faced with the same problem this year, where they have a lot of unproven guys, and you put one of them or 2 of them into a tight spot, it'll get interesting.
No doubt. I got to ask you about this. I usually don't talk a lot of special teams on this, but Virginia Tech was dead last in the nation in kick return efficiency last year. They didn't have a single kickoff brought outside of the 30. Had they talked about that? Are they going to change up the returner? Is it more of a like who you put on return team? But has there been any discussion of this? It kind of jumped out to me. It's like they always start in their deep in their own end.
Yeah, it hasn't been that big of a discussion point, but they did rotate through a ton of guys. That NC State game they lost by a point arguably turned on 2 back-to-back muffed kickoffs.
That's you don't want to muff a kickoff.
And they were, and that backed up a terrible offense up the 5-yard line and just swung field position entirely in NC State's favor late. So they're certainly looking to improve that. They brought in Jalen Lane as a kick returner, or has experience there from Middle Tennessee State. I think he's a strong candidate. The other transfer they brought in, Bayshul Tootin from NC-A&T. He's a running back. He's another option there. Tucker Holloway, he had a punt return for a touchdown. I think he could play there. So I think you hit a spot where they really need to improve, because last year they certainly could not afford to lose the field position battle, but that'll only make it that much more difficult.
Yeah, asking that 2022 offense to go 80 yards repeatedly is really not a nice thing.
No.
Ooh, man. Okay. Doug, I really appreciate your time here, man. This has been awesome. I feel like I learned a ton. Guys, I don't think anybody out there covers Virginia Tech better than VTScoop. I'm always checking out their boards to see, they were tops on that Powell Ryland coverage recently with the transfer portal, and they're always on it. So make sure you check them out if you're a Hokies fan.